Hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to Blue Flame, your home for true stories that stir the soul and echo through time. If you find comfort in tales of courage, resilience, and the quiet heroism of ordinary people, please consider subscribing, liking, and leaving a comment below. Your support helps bring more bedtime stories like this one to life. Now, settle in, draw the blanket close, and let the wind outside fade away as we journey into the heart of a storm that changed everything. Snowed in, the great blizzard of 1978. It was the last week of January in the year 1978 when the sky over northern Indiana began to shift with a quiet unease. The air grew thick, not with the usual winter stillness, but with something heavier, something watchful. In the small town of Monticello, nestled along the Tippecanoe River, folks went about their routines with the casual confidence of people who had weathered many winters before. But this one would not be like the others. At precisely 4:30 in the afternoon on Wednesday, January 25th, the first flakes began to fall, not gently as snow often does in storybooks, but with a sharp, stinging insistence. By 6 o'clock, the wind had picked up, howling through the bare branches of oak and maple like a warning no one had bothered to heed. Schools had already dismissed early. The local radio station, Wazy out of Lafayette, crackled with urgent updates. A blizzard warning is now in effect for White County, Carroll County, and surrounding areas. Winds exceeding 70 miles per hour. Visibility near zero. Do not travel. In a modest farmhouse just off County Road 500 South, a woman named Cora Velt stood at the kitchen window, her breath fogging the cold glass. At 53, Cora had lived through droughts, floods, and the long, lean years of the 1950s. But as she watched the snow swallow the fence line, then the mailbox, then the road itself, a chill deeper than winter crept into her bones. Her husband, Harlan, had passed 2 winters prior, leaving her with 200 acres of land, a rusting tractor, and silence that sometimes felt too loud to bear. She wasn't alone. Her grandson, Elian, just 16, with his grandfather's stubborn jaw and his mother's quiet eyes, was home from school early, stacking firewood by the back door. He'd been born in Chicago but had come to live with Cora after his mother's accident the year before. City boy or not, Elian had learned fast how to split logs, fix a frozen pump, and read the sky like a second language. "Gran," he called over his shoulder, brushing snow from his coat. "The generator's acting up again." Cora turned from the window, wiping her hands on her apron. "Did you check the oil?" "Twice. It's dry as dust." And the fuel lines iced over. She sighed, the sound soft but heavy. "Then we'll manage without it tonight. We've got the wood stove and plenty of candles." Outside, the storm deepened. By 8 o'clock, the world beyond their porch light had vanished. The wind screamed like a thing alive, hurling snow against the house with such force it sounded like gravel. Power lines groaned. Tree limbs snapped in the dark. And still, the snow fell, relentless, thick, and white as bone. In town, chaos unfolded. Cars abandoned on U.S. Route 24. A semi jackknifed near the county line, its driver stranded for hours before a snowplow even spotted him. At the Monticello fire station, volunteers huddled over radios, trying to coordinate rescues that were becoming impossible. Sheriff Dale Bickford, a man known more for his patience than his temper, finally slammed his fist on the desk and growled, "Nobody's going anywhere tonight." Not unless they've got wings. Back at the Velt farm, Cora and Elian ate a simple supper of bean soup and cornbread by candlelight. The fire in the stove popped and hissed. Outside, the temperature plummeted to -15, wind chill pushing it below -30. Their old collie Boone lay curled by the hearth, ears twitching at every gust. "Do you think the cows are okay?" Elian asked quietly. Cora set down her spoon. "We checked them before dark. Barn's tight, hay's dry. They'll be fine." But her voice held a tremor she couldn't quite hide. They weren't fine. Just after midnight, Elian woke to a low, mournful bellow cutting through the storm's roar. He sat up in bed, heart pounding. Another cry, closer this time. One of the heifers was calving, and in this cold, that could mean death for both mother and calf. He threw on his coat, boots, and wool cap, and crept past his grandmother's room. The door was open a crack. She was already awake, sitting upright in bed, eyes wide in the dark. "I heard it too," she whispered. They didn't speak as they pulled on layers, tied scarves over their faces, and stepped into the maelstrom. The walk to the barn, normally 2 minutes, felt like an eternity. Snow clawed at their eyes. The wind shoved them sideways. Elian clutched Cora's arm, more to keep her steady than himself. When they finally reached the barn door, it took both of them to wrench it open against the drift piling against it. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of hay, manure, and fear. Daisy, their oldest heifer, lay on her side in the far stall, panting hard, eyes rolling white. Between her legs, a tiny hoof protruded. "She's stuck," Cora said, her voice calm despite the tremor in her hands. Elian fetched clean towels, a bucket of warm water they'd left near the stove earlier, and the old birthing chains Harlan had used for decades. Together, they worked in near silence, guided by instinct and memory. Cora knelt in the straw, murmuring soft words to Daisy as Elian gently guided the calf's shoulders through the birth canal. At 2:17 in the morning, a slick, shivering calf tumbled onto the straw, black as midnight, breathing hard. Cora wrapped it in dry towels, rubbing its chest to spark circulation. Elian stayed with Daisy, offering her water, stroking her neck until her breathing slowed. They couldn't bring the calf into the house. The cold would kill it before they made it halfway. So they built a nest of hay in the warmest corner of the barn, lit a kerosene lantern nearby, and wrapped the newborn in an old horse blanket Cora kept for emergencies. Back in the farmhouse, they collapsed by the stove, too exhausted to speak. Boone lifted his head, thumped his tail once, then went back to sleep. The storm raged on through Thursday. No mail, no phone, no radio signal. Just the wind, the creak of the house, and the soft lowing from the barn. By Friday morning, the snow stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The sky cleared to a pale, brittle blue. The world outside was buried under 32 inches of snow, drifts higher than the pickup truck. But the calf lived. Daisy stood strong. And Cora, sipping bitter coffee at the kitchen table, watched Elian shovel a path to the road with a pride she didn't need to name. In the days that followed, neighbors emerged like ghosts from the whiteout, checking on each other, sharing fuel, hauling chainsaws to clear fallen trees. The National Guard rolled in with snowcats and supplies. Monticello declared a state of emergency. But for Cora and Elian, the real emergency had passed in that barn, in the dark, with their hands buried in straw and hope. The Great Blizzard of 1978 would go down in history as one of the worst winter storms the Midwest had ever seen. Over 70 lives lost, thousands stranded, entire towns cut off for days. But in the quiet corners of places like Monticello, Indiana, it was also remembered as the storm that reminded people what they were made of. As the days stretched into a fragile calm, the silence that followed the blizzard felt almost sacred. The usual hum of distant traffic, the bark of neighbor dogs, even the creak of porch swings in the breeze, all had been swallowed by snow and stillness. In Monticello, the world moved slower now, as if the storm had pressed a gentle hand on everyone's shoulder and whispered, "Breathe." Cora rose before dawn on Saturday, her joints stiff from cold and worry, but her spirit lighter than it had been in months. She filled the kettle, set it on the wood stove, and watched the steam curl toward the ceiling like a prayer. Elian was already outside, checking on the calf they'd named Ember for the faint rust-colored patch behind its ear, a spark of life in the heart of winter. The barn smelled of warm hay, milk, and new beginnings. Ember stood unsteadily on wobbly legs, nosing at Daisy's udder with clumsy determination. Cora smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening like well-worn paths. "She's got grit," she said softly. "She gets it from you," Elian replied, brushing snow from his boots. They spent the morning clearing a narrow path from the house to the barn, then another to the mailbox, though no mail would come for days. Still, the act of shoveling, of carving order from chaos, felt necessary. Healing even. By midday, a distant rumble broke the quiet. Not thunder, snowplows. 2 county trucks, orange lights flashing like beacons, crawled down County Road 500 South, blades scraping through drifts taller than a man. One of the drivers spotted Cora and waved. She raised a gloved hand in return, then turned to Elian. "Looks like the world's coming back." But not everyone had been so lucky. That afternoon, word reached them through a crackling battery-powered radio. Old man Pritchett, who lived alone on the edge of town near Mud Creek, hadn't been seen since Tuesday. His truck sat abandoned half a mile from his driveway, keys still in the ignition. Volunteers had tried to reach his house Wednesday night but turned back in whiteout conditions. Now, with roads barely passable, a search party was forming. Cora's face tightened. "He's got that bad hip. Can't walk far." Elian looked at her. "We should go." She hesitated only a moment. "We will. But we take the tractor. And we bundle up like we're heading to the North Pole." The old farmel, though ancient and groaning in protest, chewed through the snow better than any car. They loaded it with blankets, thermoses of hot broth, a first aid kit, and Boone, who sat proudly in the front, ears perked. The journey to Pritchett's took nearly an hour, normally a 10-minute drive. Snowdrifts swallowed fence posts. Mailboxes stood like lonely sentinels. The landscape was transformed, alien yet achingly familiar. They found him in his woodshed, half buried under a collapsed shelf, weak from cold and dehydration but alive. He'd been trying to fetch more logs when the roof beam gave way under the weight of snow. For 2 days, he'd lain there, calling out until his voice gave out, surviving on melted snow and sheer stubbornness. Cora knelt beside him, pressing a thermos to his chapped lips. "Drink slow, Walter. You're safe now." Elian helped clear the debris while Boone nosed gently at Pritchett's hand, as if to say, "We've got you." They radioed the fire station from Pritchett's landline, miraculously still working, and within the hour, a snowcat arrived to transport him to the clinic in town. As they watched him bundled into the vehicle, wrapped in layers and oxygen, Cora placed a hand on Elian's shoulder. "You did good today." He shrugged, but his eyes shone. "We did good." Back at the farm, dusk painted the snow in shades of lavender and rose. Inside, the wood stove glowed, casting long shadows that danced on the walls. Cora fried up the last of the potatoes with onions, and they ate in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after shared hardship. Later, as Elian washed the dishes, Cora sat by the window with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the stars blink awake in the clear, cold sky. She thought of Harlan, how he'd loved nights like this, how he'd stand out on the porch just to feel the stillness. She missed him fiercely, but for the first time in a long while, the missing didn't ache like a wound. It felt more like a thread, thin, but unbroken, tying her to everything that mattered. Sunday morning brought church bells, faint but steady, carried on the wind from town. The roads were still impassable for most, but a handful of the faithful trudged through the snow to the little white chapel on Main Street. Cora and Elian joined them, boots crunching on packed snow, breath rising in white plumes. Inside, the sanctuary was warm, lit by candles and kerosene lanterns. Pastor Evans, his voice hoarse from days of worry and prayer, spoke not of doctrine, but of community, of how storms reveal not just our fragility, but our capacity to reach for one another in the dark. After the service, neighbors lingered in the vestibule, sharing stories, offering rides, trading jars of preserves and bags of flour. No one asked if you were okay, they simply assumed you weren't and acted accordingly. That was the unspoken language of places like Monticello: care without ceremony, help without hesitation. In the week that followed, life began to stitch itself back together. Power returned. The school reopened, though attendance was spotty. Farmers assessed losses, fences down, livestock gone, fields buried, but also counted blessings: barns still standing, families safe, neighbors alive. Cora received a letter from the county extension office, commending her for exemplary stewardship during emergency conditions. She tucked it in Harlan's old Bible and said nothing. Elian, meanwhile, started keeping a journal. Not the kind filled with teenage angst, but quiet observations. How the ice on the creek cracked like glass at sunrise, how Ember took her first real run across the yard, how Gran's hands never shook when she lit the stove, even when the wind screamed like a banshee. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the snow in gold and crimson, Elian asked, "Do you think it'll ever be like this again?" Cora sipped her tea, eyes on the horizon. Storms come and go, but people stay. That's what matters. And in that moment, with Boone at their feet and the scent of wood smoke in the air, the world felt whole again. Not because the blizzard had passed, but because they had faced it together. Years later, long after Elian had graduated, moved away, and returned with a wife and child of his own, he would tell his daughter about the great blizzard of 1978. Not as a tale of disaster, but as a story of warmth in the coldest dark, of hands reaching through snow, of a calf named Ember and a grandmother who never stopped believing the sun would rise again. And every January, without fail, he and Cora, gray-haired but sharp-eyed, would stand at that same kitchen window, watching the first snow fall and smile. Because they knew now, no storm lasts forever. But love? Love digs in. Love builds fires. Love waits in the barn at midnight, ready to catch life as it tumbles into the world. The winter of 1978 did not end with the thaw. It lingered, in the way folks double-checked their storm cellars, in the extra cans of beans stacked in pantries, in the quiet glances exchanged when the wind picked up just right. But more than that, it lingered in the bonds it forged. In Monticello, people didn't just remember who showed up with firewood or who drove through drifts to check on an elderly neighbor. They carried that knowledge like a compass, pointing always toward kindness. By early February, the snow began its slow retreat, melting into muddy fields and swollen creeks. The Tippecanoe River rose 10 feet above its banks, turning low-lying pastures into temporary lakes. Cora's South 40 flooded, but she didn't mind. "Water's life," she told Elian as they stood on the porch watching geese return in ragged V formations. even when it's too much. Ember, now strong and curious, followed Alien everywhere, through the barnyard, along the fence line, even into the kitchen once, leaving muddy hoofprints on the linoleum before Cora gently shooed her back out with a chuckle. "You're raising a dog, not a calf," she teased, but there was pride in her voice. Alien had taken to the farm life with a quiet grace that surprised even him. He no longer flinched at the sound of a rooster at dawn or hesitated before mending a broken gate. The city boy was becoming something else, something rooted. One afternoon, while repairing a section of fence damaged by the storm, Alien found a rusted pocket watch half buried in the mud near the old oak. It was tarnished, the glass cracked, but the hands still ticked faintly when he wound it. He brought it to Cora, who turned it over in her hands like a memory. "That was Harlan's," she said softly. "He lost it the fall before he passed. Said it slipped out of his coat while he was fixing the west gate." She opened the back. Inside, etched in delicate script, were the words, "For time well spent." She handed it back to Alien. "He'd want you to have it." Alien didn't say much, but that night, he cleaned the watch with oil and cloth until the brass gleamed. He kept it in his coat pocket from then on, not to tell time, but as a reminder that some things endure, even when buried. As March arrived, bringing slush and the first crocuses pushing through damp earth, the town held a community supper at the Grange Hall. It wasn't fancy, just ham, mashed potatoes, green beans from last summer's canning, but it was packed. Sheriff Bickford gave a short speech, thanking volunteers, praising resilience, and admitting with uncharacteristic humility that he'd never seen anything like that blizzard in his 30 years on the force. Cora sat near the back, Boone at her feet, watching Alien laugh with a group of boys from school. He'd made friends slowly but surely, drawn to him not by bravado, but by the quiet steadiness he'd shown during those frozen days. One of them, a lanky kid named Joss whose family ran the feed store, clapped Alien on the shoulder and said something that made them both grin. "He fits here," a voice said beside her. Cora turned to see Marge Hensley, her oldest friend since grade school, balancing a plate of pie. "Always did," Cora replied. Marge lowered herself into the chair with a sigh. "You know, I worried when he first came. Thought the city had softened him." Cora smiled. "Cities don't soften people. They just teach them different kinds of strength." Later that week, a letter arrived from Chicago. It was from Alien's aunt, his mother's sister, who had tried to take him in after the accident but couldn't manage the grief or the responsibility. The letter was polite, distant, and ended with a simple question. "Would you consider letting him stay with you permanently?" Cora read it twice. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in the drawer beside Harlan's Bible, and went to find Alien. She found him in the barn, brushing Ember while humming a tune Cora didn't recognize. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him for a long moment. The way his shoulders had broadened, the way his hands moved with purpose. "Got a letter today?" she said finally. He looked up, eyes cautious. "Yeah. From your aunt." He stopped brushing. Ember nuzzled his arm, as if sensing the shift in the air. Cora stepped forward, her boots scuffing straw. "She asked if you could stay. With me." Silence stretched, filled only by the soft snuffle of cows and the distant call of a red-winged blackbird. Alien looked down at the watch in his pocket, then back at Cora. His voice was quiet but clear. "I'm already home." Something unclenched in Cora's chest. She nodded once, then reached out and ruffled his hair like he was still a boy. "But because I wasn't planning on letting you go." Spring deepened. The fields dried enough for plowing. Cora and Alien worked side by side, turning the earth under a sky that seemed bluer for having survived the gray. They planted corn, oats, and a small patch of sunflowers near the house, Harlan's favorite. "So he can watch them grow," Cora said, pressing seeds into the soil. One evening in late April, as fireflies blinked to life in the gathering dusk, Elian sat on the porch steps with a pocket watch in his palm. Cora joined him, handing him a glass of lemonade sweetened with honey from their own hives. "You ever think about what you'll do when you're older?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "I used to think I'd go back to the city, be an architect or something, build things that touch the sky. And now?" He looked out over the fields, where ember grazed with the herd, where the wind moved through young corn like a whispered secret. "Now I think maybe I'd like to build things that last. Things that feed people, shelter them, things that help a place stay whole." Cora sipped her lemonade, eyes bright. "Sounds like farming to me." She grinned. "Guess it does." Years passed as years do, quietly, steadily, with seasons folding into one another like pages in a well-loved book. Elian finished high school, took night classes in agricultural science at Purdue, and eventually bought the adjoining 40 acres when old Mr. Callahan retired to Florida. He married a nurse named Lena who'd moved to town after the blizzard, drawn by the stories of how Monticello had pulled together. They built a small house near the creek, close enough to Cora's that she could see their porch light from her kitchen window. Cora never left the farmhouse. She grew older, slower, but never frail. Even at 80, she could still split kindling and tell a storm was coming by the ache in her knees. And every January 25th, without fail, she and Elian would walk out to the barn at midnight, stand in the same stall where Ember had been born, and raise a toast with mugs of hot cider. "To the storm," Elian would say. "To the stillness after," Cora would reply. Ember lived to be 14, old for a dairy cow, and when she passed, they buried her beneath the old oak where Harlan's watch had been found. Elian carved a simple marker from walnut, *Ember. Born in the blizzard, keeper of warmth, *. The great blizzard of 1978 faded from headlines, then from memory, then from history books, reduced to a footnote, a weather statistic. But in Monticello, it remained alive in stories told over kitchen tables, in the way neighbors still check on each other when snow begins to fall, in the extra shovel kept by the back door, just in case. And in the heart of a woman who once stood at a window watching the world disappear, and a boy who learned. Time, like the Tippecanoe River, kept flowing, sometimes slow and steady, sometimes rushing over hidden stones. By the turn of the new century, Monticello had grown just enough to feel the edges of change. A new pharmacy on Main Street, a stoplight near the high school, internet wires strung along poles that once carried only telephone lines. But the heart of the town, the rhythm of its days, the quiet loyalty of its people, remained untouched by the rush of the outside world. Cora, now in her late 80s, still rose with the sun. Her hands bore the map of a long life, knuckles swollen with arthritis, skin thin as parchment. But they never trembled when she stirred her morning oatmeal or braided dough for Sunday bread. She'd given up driving years ago, but Elian or Lena would stop by every morning without fail, often with fresh eggs, a jar of tomato sauce, or simply to sit with her over coffee while Boone's great-grandpup, a scrappy terrier named Pip, dozed at their feet. The farmhouse had seen updates, a new roof after the ice storm of 1994, insulated windows, a small solar panel array Elian installed, so you won't freeze if the power goes out again. But Cora insisted the wood stove stay. Some things, she'd say, ought not to be replaced. In the summer of 2007, a documentary crew from Indianapolis came to Monticello to film a segment on historic Midwest weather events. They interviewed survivors of the blizzard, now gray-haired, some leaning on canes, all speaking with the same hushed reverence. When they asked to speak with Coravelt, Elian hesitated. She rarely gave interviews. But this time, she agreed. They set up in her kitchen, cameras angled to catch the morning light through the lace curtains. The young producer, barely older than Elian had been during the storm, asked gentle questions about fear, survival, and what it felt like to be snowed in for days. Cora stirred her tea, then looked directly into the lens. Fear's a funny thing. It don't come roaring in like the wind. It sneaks in quiet when you're counting candles, or wondering if the calf will breathe, or if your neighbor's still alive in that little house down the road. But courage? Courage is just love with its sleeves rolled up. The clip went viral. Not in the way of cat videos or celebrity gossip, but in the deeper, slower way that truth travels, through shared memories, forwarded emails, late-night conversations. Letters began arriving at the farm again, this time from strangers. A teacher in Ohio who used Cora's words in her classroom, a veteran in Minnesota who said her line about courage helped him speak about his own war, a young mother in Colorado who named her daughter Cora after hearing the interview. She read every letter, answered most of them in her looping cursive, always ending with, "Stay warm, and look out for one another." That fall, Elian and Lena's daughter, Juniper, named for the hardy evergreen that thrives in harsh soil, started kindergarten. On her first day, she wore a red coat and carried Harlan's pocket watch in her backpack, not as a timepiece, but as a talisman. "It's from great-grand Cora," she told her teacher proudly. "It helped save a baby cow in a blizzard." Cora watched from the porch as Elian walked Juniper to the bus stop, her tiny hand swallowed in his. The school bus, yellow and rumbling, pulled away down the same road that had vanished under snow all those decades ago. Now, it carried children into a future Cora could hardly imagine, but one she trusted, because she knew the hands that were shaping it. Winter returned as it always does. Not every year brought a blizzard, but each season carried its own kind of test. A drought, a market crash, a global pandemic that kept people apart even as it reminded them how much they needed each other. Through it all, the Velt farm remained a quiet anchor. When the grocery shelves emptied in 2020, Cora's root cellar, stocked with canned beans, pickled beets, and jars of peach preserves, fed 3 families for weeks. Elian delivered firewood to elderly neighbors. Lena, now head nurse at the county clinic, worked double shifts while Juniper did homework at the kitchen table, watched over by Pip and the ghost of a collie named Boone. One evening in January of 2023, 45 years to the day after the Great Blizzard, Juniper came running into the farmhouse, snow dusting her eyelashes. "Gran Cora, there's a calf coming." Cora didn't move fast anymore, but she moved with purpose. She grabbed her coat, her cane, and the old birthing kit still kept in the hall closet, clean, oiled, ready. Elian met them at the barn door, his face lit by the lantern's glow. It was Daisy's great-great-granddaughter, another heifer, another storm brewing outside. Not a blizzard this time, just a steady snow, soft and silent. But the feeling in the barn was the same: anticipation, tenderness, the sacred hush of life beginning anew. Juniper watched wide-eyed as Cora knelt in the straw, her voice low and steady, guiding the calf into the world. When it finally emerged, slick, trembling, alive, she wrapped it in the same horse blanket Harlan had used, the fabric faded but intact. "What should we name her?" Juniper whispered. Cora looked at Elian, then at the snow falling gently beyond the open barn door. "Aurora," she said, "for the dawn after the longest night." Later, as they walked back to the house, Juniper held Cora's hand. "Will I ever see a blizzard like the one you saw, Gran?" Cora squeezed her fingers. "I hope not, sweetheart. But if you do, you'll know what to do." "How?" "Because you've been raised by people who remember. And remembering is how we keep each other safe." Inside, the wood stove crackled. Lena had left a pot of stew on the back burner. Pip barked once, then settled at Cora's feet. On the wall, a framed photograph showed a much younger Cora and Elian standing in front of the barn, snow up to their knees, smiling like they'd already won. That night, As wind whispered through the eaves, Cora sat in her rocking chair, the pocket watch ticking softly in her lap. She thought of Harlan, of Walter Pritchett, of all the voices stilled by time. She thought of the roads buried, the hands that reached through snow, the calf that lived because two people refused to look away. And she knew this was how history truly endures. Not in books or documentaries, but in the way a grandmother teaches her great-granddaughter to check the barn before bed, in the extra quilt kept by the door, in the quiet certainty that no one is ever truly alone as long as someone remembers to look for them. The storm of 1978 had passed, but its lessons, its warmth, its stubborn hope had taken root. And like the sunflowers Harlan loved, they kept blooming year after year, in the hearts of those who chose to stay, to care, to carry the light forward. The years that followed carried a gentler rhythm, as if time itself had learned patience from Cora. By the spring of 2026, Juniper was 10 years old enough to drive the tractor in the lower field under Elian's watchful eye, old enough to know which herbs in the garden eased a cough, and old enough to understand that some silences hold more love than words ever could. Cora's steps had grown slower, her naps longer, but her mind remained sharp as a scythe at harvest. She still kept a journal, not the kind filled with dates and duties, but one lined with observations. The first robin of spring, the way the light hit the creek at dusk, the exact moment Pip learned to open the screen door with his nose. On the inside cover, she'd written in faded ink, "To remember is to honor." One warm afternoon in May, as lilacs bloomed along the fence line and bees hummed in the clover, a package arrived from the Indiana Historical Society. Inside was a framed certificate declaring Cora Velt a keeper of community memory, along with a request. Would she consider donating some of her personal accounts of the blizzard to their oral history archive? Elian read the letter aloud on the porch. Juniper curled at his feet with a sketchbook, drawing Ember's descendant, Aurora, grazing near the oak tree. Cora listened, her eyes closed against the sun, hands folded in her lap. "Tell them yes," she said simply, "but only if they promise to include the part about Walter Pritchett and the school bus driver who walked 3 miles to check on his students, and Marge Hensley who baked bread for the whole block. It wasn't just me, Elian. It was all of us." He smiled. "I'll make sure they know." That summer, the farm hosted its first Blizzard Remembrance Day, not a formal event, just an open invitation. Neighbors came with casseroles and folding chairs. Kids played tag in the yard where drifts once stood taller than the mailbox. Someone brought an old radio, and they played the Wazy broadcast from January 25, 1978, the crackling voice warning of zero visibility, 70-mile-per-hour winds, and the quiet plea, "stay home. Stay safe, *." Juniper stood beside Cora as the recording played, her small hand resting on her great-grandmother's knee. "Did you really not leave the house for 3 days?" she asked. "We left," Cora said softly. "Just not for ourselves." Later, as fireflies blinked above the fields, Elian stood to speak. He didn't give a speech, just a story. He told them about the night Ember was born, about the cold so deep it stole your breath, about how his grandmother's hands never shook even when the world seemed to be ending. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye on the porch. Marge Hensley, now 92 and still baking her famous sour cream coffee cake, raised her glass of sweet tea. "To Cora," she said, "who taught us that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the presence of love." The toast rippled through the crowd, carried on voices rough with age and tender with memory. As autumn returned, painting the maples in flame and gold, Cora began to spend more time in the sunroom, a small addition Elian had built years ago so she could watch the fields without braving the stairs. She kept Harlan's pocket watch on the windowsill, where the light caught its brass face each morning. Juniper visited every day after school, often with homework. sometimes with nothing but stories of her own. One rainy Tuesday in October, Juniper brought a school project, a diorama of the Veld farm during the blizzard. Tiny cotton ball drifts covered miniature fences. A toothpick barn stood sturdy against a backdrop of swirling gray paper. In the window of the little house, a speck of yellow paper glowed. "The light you kept on," she explained. Cora traced the edge of the diorama with a trembling finger. "You made it just like it was." "Because you told me," Juniper said, "and I never want to forget." That night, after Juniper left and the house settled into its familiar quiet, Cora sat by the wood stove, wrapped in the same quilt she'd used during the storm. The wind outside was mild, nothing like the gales of her youth, but it carried the same whisper, the same reminder that change is constant, but care is choice. She wrote one last letter that evening. Not to a stranger, not to a historian, but to Juniper. She tucked it into the journal, sealed with a sprig of dried lavender from the garden. In it she wrote, "My dearest Juniper, if you're reading this, I've gone to walk with Harlan in fields where the snow never falls and the sun always shines. But don't you cry for me. I've lived a life full of warmth, even in the coldest winters, because I was never alone. You carry that same strength in you, the kind that shows up, that stays, that believes in dawn even when the night is long. Keep the watch. Keep the fire. And most of all, keep looking out for each other. That's how we beat the storm. Always, *. She signed it simply, "With all my love, Gran Cora." Winter came again. Not with fury, but with grace. On the morning of January 25, 2027, exactly 49 years after the Great Blizzard, Cora Veld passed peacefully in her sleep, her hand resting on the journal, the pocket watch ticking softly beside her. The town mourned, but not with despair. They gathered at the Grange Hall, not for a funeral, but for a celebration. Photos lined the walls. Cora as a young woman in a flour-dusted apron, Cora teaching Elian to milk a cow, Cora laughing with Marge over a game of cards, Cora holding newborn Juniper with tears in her eyes. In the center of the room stood the diorama, now framed and labeled, "The Light That Stayed On." Elian spoke last. His voice was steady, though his eyes shone. "She didn't just survive the blizzard," he said. "She taught us how to live after it." In the weeks that followed, life on the farm continued. Aurora gave birth to twins in early March. Juniper named them Sol and Luna. Elian and Lena planted a new row of sunflowers near the oak tree, Cora's favorite. And every evening, without fail, someone lit the lantern in the front window. Not because they were afraid of the dark, but because someone once taught them that light is a promise. And promises, like love, do not end with a single lifetime. They ripple outward, through snow, through silence, through generations, until they become the very ground we walk on. Years folded into decades like pages in a well-worn almanac, each season adding its own verse to the quiet song of the Veld farm. By the time Juniper turned 18, the world had changed in ways Cora could never have imagined. Cars that drove themselves, voices summoned from thin air, news that traveled faster than snow on the wind. Yet some things remained stubbornly, beautifully unchanged. The creak of the barn door at dawn, the smell of rain on dry earth, the way the first snow of winter still hushed the world into reverence. Juniper left for college in the fall of 2035, not to the city as Elian once had feared, but to Purdue, where she studied sustainable agriculture. She commuted, returning every weekend with notebooks full of soil pH charts and crop rotation plans, her boots still caked with Indiana mud. "I'm not leaving," she told her father once, stirring a pot of stew in Cora's old kitchen. "I'm learning how to come back better." And come back she did. By her junior year, she designed a pilot program to help small farms in White County transition to regenerative practices, cover crops, rotational grazing, solar-powered irrigation, all rooted in the same principles Cora had lived by: work with the land, not against it, take only what you need, leave things better than you found them. The old farmhouse became a classroom of sorts. Farmers from neighboring counties gathered on Sunday afternoons, sipping coffee brewed in Cora's chipped enamel pot, listening as Juniper explained how healthy soil could withstand both drought and deluge. Elian watched from the doorway, arms crossed, pride warming him more than the wood stove ever could. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise over the fields, Juniper turned to him. "Do you ever miss the city?" Elian considered the question, his gaze drifting to the silhouette of the oak tree where Harlan's watch had been found, where Ember was buried, where sunflowers still bloomed every July. "I don't think I ever really belonged there," he said. "I just didn't know it until the storm showed me where home was." Juniper smiled. Gran Cora used to say the blizzard didn't make us who we are. It just reminded us. In the spring of 2037, Juniper launched the Blizzard Resilience Initiative, a community network focused on mutual aid during extreme weather. It started small: a shared generator bank, a volunteer snowplow roster, a text alert system for elderly residents. But within 2 years, it had expanded to 5 counties. When a historic ice storm knocked out power for 10 days in January of 2039, the network kept every vulnerable household warm, fed, and connected. At the center of it all stood the Velt Farm, now officially renamed Ember Homestead in honor of the calf born in the storm. A small plaque by the driveway read, "Established in memory of those who stayed, who helped, who believed the sun would rise again." That same year, Juniper received a letter from the National Weather Service. They were updating their educational materials on historic U.S. storms and wanted to include a section on community response during the Great Blizzard of 1978. Would she be willing to contribute? She spent weeks going through Cora's journal, Elian's old photos, Marge Hensley's recipe cards stained with broth and hope. She wrote not just about wind speeds or snowfall totals, but about the woman who walked 3 miles in a blizzard to deliver insulin, the teenager who shared his last can of beans with a stranded trucker, the grandmother who delivered a calf in the dark because no one else could. Her essay ended with this: "*The storm measured our land in inches of snow. But we measured each other in acts of care. And in that we were never buried. **. The piece was published in schools across the Midwest. Teachers used it to discuss not just weather, but character. Students wrote letters to Juniper, asking how they could build their own Ember homesteads in their towns. One girl in South Dakota started a winter check-in chain for her neighborhood. A boy in Ohio organized a tool library so no one would be without a shovel when the snow came. Back in Monticello, life carried on with its gentle rhythm. Lena retired from nursing but opened a wellness clinic in the old feed store, offering herbal remedies and counseling. Elian, his hair now silver as frost, spent his mornings tending bees. 2 hives at first, then 6, their honey sold at the farmer's market under the label Velt Gold, sweetness after the storm. Pip had long since passed, but his spirit lived on in a new terrier pup named Ember 2, who chased chickens with the same joyful chaos as her namesake. Then, in the winter of 2042, another storm came. Not as fierce as the one in 1978, nothing ever was, but severe enough. Winds howled. Power flickered. Snow piled against doors. And just like before, people turned to each other. Juniper, now 30, coordinated the Blizzard Resilience Network from the sunroom Cora had loved, her laptop open beside a mug of chamomile tea. Elian and Lena checked on neighbors. Volunteers delivered firewood, batteries, and soup. And at midnight, Juniper walked out to the barn, now solar-heated and Wi-Fi enabled, yet still smelling of hay and history, where a heifer named Solstice was calving. Alone but not alone. just like Grand Cora had been. When the calf, a sturdy bull with a white star on his forehead, slipped into the world at 1:12 a.m., Juniper wrapped him in the same horse blanket, now carefully mended in 3 places. She named him Harlan. Back in the house, she opened Cora's journal to a fresh page. Her handwriting echoed her great-grandmother's loops and slants. January 25, 2042. The wind sounds like it did in the stories. But we are ready. Not because we fear the storm, but because we know what waits on the other side. Each other. The light is on. The door is open. And the fire, Grand's fire, still burns, asterisk. Years later, when Juniper's own daughter, Cora May, asked why they always lit the lantern on the last Wednesday of January, she took her to the oak tree. There, beneath a stone marker carved with names, Harlan, Ember, Coravelt, she told the story. Not of a blizzard, but of a promise. And as the snow began to fall that evening, soft and silent, Cora May placed a small solar lantern at the base of the tree. Its glow joined the one in the farmhouse window, and the one down the road at Marge's old house, now lived in by a young couple who'd read about Monticello in a history book. Light passing from hand to hand, memory becoming action, and love outlasting even the longest winter. But some winters do not end. Decades after the Great Blizzard of 1978 had faded into legend, long after Coravelt's name was etched in stone and her stories softened by time, something stirred in the fields beyond the oak tree. It began subtly, so subtly no one noticed at first. The cattle grew restless on still nights, lowing toward the woods as if answering a call no human ear could hear. The wind, when it blew from the north, carried a whisper, not of snow, but of voices. Not pleading, not lost, waiting. Juniper, now in her late 50s, was the first to feel it. She'd stand at the kitchen window on clear January nights, watching the snow fall in perfect silence, and swear the drifts moved when no wind blew. Once, she found hoof prints near the barn, not Ember's descendants, but something older, deeper, as if pressed into the earth from below. Then came the dreams. In them, she stood in the barn on that blizzard night, but Cora was gone. The lantern flickered. The calf, Ember, was not breathing. And from the far stall, where Daisy once lay, came a slow, wet, dragging sound. When she turned, the straw was stained black, not with blood, but with something thicker, colder. And the eyes that watched her from the shadows were not bovine. They were human, hollow, familiar. She stopped sleeping. The townsfolk dismissed it as grief, or age, or the weight of legacy. But Marge's granddaughter, who now ran the Historical Society, found something unsettling while digitizing old emergency logs from 1978. Buried in Sheriff Bickford's final report was a line never made public. Asterisk, 3 persons unaccounted for during storm. No bodies recovered. Presumed buried in drifts near County Road 500 South, asterisk. The names were redacted, but one partial entry remained. Last seen attempting to reach Velt property for shelter. Juniper dug through Cora's journal again, pages she'd read 100 times. But now, in the margins of the entry for January 26th, faint and nearly erased, were words she'd never noticed, asterisk. They knocked 3 times. I did not open the door. The storm was too deep. God forgive me, asterisk. That night, the power went out across Monticello. Not from wind or ice, from nothing. Just silence. And cold. A cold that seeped through walls, froze pipes solid, and made breath crystallize in midair. At exactly 1:17 a.m., the hour Ember was born, the barn door swung open on its own. Juniper stood on the porch, wrapped in Cora's old quilt, heart hammering. The snow-covered yard was empty, but the footprints led from the road straight to her doorstep. 3 sets. Well, desperate. stopping just beneath the lantern. And then, from inside the house, a voice, dry as winter straw, cracked with decades of silence, whispered from the kitchen. "Let us in." The lantern flickered, then went out,